Welcome to Co-Opinions, where we talk about our opinions and want to hear about yours. Today I have Aaron with me.
Howdy.
And I have Rachel with me.
Hey.
First, let's talk about what we played this last week. I know you don't have much time to play games.
I've been replaying Fallout with the new additions of DLCs. I've been going back and remaking characters to try different builds and see how the game plays differently.
Is there a lot of variation you can have, or...?
Really, you end up playing the same character. At least I always end up playing the same character. Because when I originally play, I always make the smart character who really can't stand up into a fight. And then I rebuild and try and make a big, stupid guy to hit somebody with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And they always end up going more the intelligent, charismatic way as opposed to big, dumb, hit him with a hammer.
Well, that sounds like a confusing thing to happen every time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Rachel, have you managed to play anything?
Not lately.
All right.
I was playing Little Big Planet for a little bit, but then he didn't want to play with me, and I petered off.
So did he not want to play with you because you were bad or because he was terrible?
Combination.
Got it.
I was terrible.
Okay.
Well, but like we'd get frustrated with puzzles, and then just be like, it's good. It's a good time to stop.
Were there a lot of puzzles in that game? I only remember pretty basic platforming.
It's mostly puzzles. It depends on how you do it, but at least with the new one, because they're on like 3 or whatever, it's all puzzles. It's
all right.
all, especially in co-op mode when you have 2 people, you're like running through trying to time your jumps appropriately to like hit certain things and get certain power up and stuff.
All right.
By power up, I mean stickers. But.
That's one like the best power ups. Love some stickers. Are they shiny? I haven't played since the first game.
Some of them are shiny. I mean, like, they've definitely kept up with the design of the...
With the sticker technology?
The game, yeah.
Okay.
You know.
Wonderful. You need high-quality sticker design.
Always.
So I've managed to get a little gaming in myself. Just some Odin Sphere. I also was playing Xenoblade Chronicles X. Just lots of random stuff that you'll never, ever play. So no discussion to be had on that one.
I know what Odin Sphere is.
You do know what Odin Sphere is. When I played it a decade ago, it hasn't changed that. It's been a decade.
It's been a decade.
2007, so 9 years. Yep, you're getting old. So on to some small news for the last week. Did you play any of the Arkham games?
I did not.
How about you, Rachel? No? Well, did you see they were coming out the HD collection of those?
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that they got delayed indefinitely?
I did not. It's just an HD update, right?
Well, they've messed those up before, and rather than rush something out, like the PC version of Arkham Knight was trash. They had to patch it a ton of times. They actually ended up removing it from PC and re-releasing it. It got broke so bad. So it's really funny because it was supposed to come out in like 2 weeks. Like, nope, never mind.
On second thought, just forget about this for now.
Yeah, maybe we should bounce on that. A thing that is not getting delayed that was just announced, and this directly affects you because I know you played them, the BioShock HD collection. Have you heard anything about that?
Just that it was coming out.
Is that something that you're going to buy, either of you are interested in?
BioShock was fun the first time around, and it's an interesting gameplay. I don't know if I care enough to buy the HD remake.
You beat the first one and the second one. I know that for a fact because you lived with me then.
I beat all 3, yeah.
You beat Infinite?
Yeah.
But you never played the DLC?
I did not play the DLC.
Okay. You never played the DLC for the second one either, did you?
I did not.
Okay. That's the problem I have is I've beaten all of these a ton of times, but they're still really good games. Probably not going to go back in for it. But it's interesting they finally announced it.
Yeah, it's fun, but the DLCs to me never seemed interesting enough to get me to replay the whole game.
Well, you don't have to replay the whole game. They're standalone.
Yeah, but a lot of DLCs have encouraged me to go back and replay the whole game. You get the game day one or within the first month, you play through it a couple times, goes on the shelf. DLC comes out 6-7 months later, you replay the game, you pick up the DLC and play through that.
Which is what we did with Borderlands.
Yeah.
When their DLCs came out. And
every single time.
Different kind of stuff. We'd play through that a lot.
And we will come back to that here in a moment. I guarantee you get some length out of that. But the last thing, the small news, did you see the Resident Evil 7 Wesker thing?
No.
Because I know we played RE5 and Wesker died in a volcano.
He did.
Straight up died in a volcano, and apparently they're bringing him back somehow. If he's not a lava monster, they've failed us all, because RE6 was disappointing enough without the lack of Wesker.
Yeah, you can retcon anything. Oh, we had a petri dish full of cells and grew ourselves a new Wesker. Whatever, go back.
I think you just spoiled the game.
Umbrella's an evil cloning corporation, so yeah.
They are
Not much
just...
of a stretch of imagination.
It's really not. I didn't even consider that. Now I'm sad.
Do you really play those games for the writing? I know I played for shooting a giant spider in the face with a rocket launcher.
Did I tell you when all was said and done, we ended up sinking 48 hours into that game?
Ugh.
I'm surprised it's only 48 hours. We replayed that a lot.
We played that game like 3 times. He never told you that?
I just assume that you guys have played a lot of video games. I never actually calculate hours.
Well, that's why we don't either. They keep account of it. It's pretty great.
It also makes me sad when I think about it, so I try not to.
Well, we had to grind a lot of money in that game so we could afford the infinite rocket launcher.
Yes.
But even once we had the infinite rocket launcher, we still replayed it like once or twice because you could just walk through.
Once we got the infinite rocket launcher, we played through on professional.
Yeah, played through on the hardest difficulty.
Right, where anything killed you in one hit. Like rocket launcher, everything.
Yeah,
we're not going to try to do this the right way. We can move on to the first topic we were going to talk about, which was going to be a you guys-centric topic, and that was to talk about Borderlands, because you guys play Borderlands to death.
Absolutely.
Why?
Because it's the only game I actually play.
Well, I know you play other games.
I do, but not to the same extent. Like, it's the only one that I can seem to muster the interest to replay it, especially when DLCs came out, like I said, or when even just as a shoot 'em in the face game.
Whereas I absolutely just play one game to death. It is not uncommon for me to sink 50 hours into a game without thinking. And so to have something that I can share with Rachel makes that infinitely easier as opposed to her just kind of sitting next to me and watching everything.
You play Fallout 5 times?
Fallout's a different issue. I generally don't mind because a lot of the games that you play are more cinematic in nature. Because I watch for the storyline. And so then if it's got something more complex to it, I don't care so much. But it is nice to have something that we can play together. And the nice thing about Borderlands is because of the way that it is, you never get the same setup every time. Because of the different branching within the XP thing. I don't remember what that's called.
Each character has 3 development trees.
Okay.
And that affects not only how you play, but how you play in a group. And so with 4 characters that you can build either as a standalone or more for a group play, it affects how you build that character. In addition, every time they come out with the DLCs for the game, they release 2 more characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives you another chance to play through the game either by yourself or in a group with a completely different playstyle. So you have your sniper, you have your big gunner, you have your tank.
And beyond that, every time you play, you come across different loot. And so then the gun structure is different. You don't always get the same weapons. Like, you can find the laser rifle if you really like that one, but it won't necessarily have the same strengths. And so then you end up playing differently a little bit every time anyway.
Isn't there like 1,000 billion guns?
There's like something ridiculous, yeah.
There are 100 different guns and each one is at a different level. And so it's a matter of having the gun with the qualities you like at the proper level that you can use it and not suck with it.
What got you guys into this franchise? Because suddenly one day you're like, Borderlands for 1,000,000 years.
So she had originally played it with
The first one.
The first one.
Yeah, I think I played that with a previous boyfriend, and that was the first game that I found that I really liked. Because I really liked partially the flavor text. I really like the comic book art style. I think it's it's not overly gory, it's not overly realistic. I mean, it is but it's more cartoonish.
Cartoon gore.
Right.
So it's not anything like Call of Duty or something like that, any of that kind of stuff.
Where she said, hey, I want to play this game. And it was, sure.
It's always his response when I say I want to play a game.
I want to do a thing. All right, yes, dear.
No, it was, hey, you want to play a video game?
Yeah.
You're not going to yell at me for sitting in front of the television for 8 hours again? Yes. Let's
All
do
right.
this.
Happy compromise.
Yeah.
So,
and then they turned out to be great games. So.
And you've played all of them, right? Borderlands 2,
And
pre-sequel.
Yeah.
Which of those have you felt is the best? I would imagine it'd be the most recent one, but sometimes recent iterations can screw things up.
I still have a special place for Borderlands 1 just because I like the uniqueness of it, right? Whenever you have a sequel, you're building off of something, and so you're either trying to outdo yourself or give it a new component. And there was something unique to the first one that was a cool first iteration at a different idea. As far as playthrough, pre-sequel is a lot of fun. There's a lot going on. You get different abilities, because that's the one on the moon where you can bounce, and so there's a different aspect there. I think they did a pretty good job of making them all standalone good games.
Pre-sequel is easily the best as far as gameplay. It gives you the most options, and none of them have been janky by any means. They all play very well. But pre-sequel has taken everything the other two games started to develop and just taken it a step further, like you want sequels to do.
Mm-hmm.
As far as storyline, again, I really liked the first one. I'm a little upset that when they did the Handsome Jack collection and re-released the second game and the pre-sequel, they did not do any update for the first game.
Well, you heard why that was, right?
Because it would take too much time to update it from the old systems.
Yeah, they said it would be an enormous amount of work to the point where they would have had to sell a bajillion copies to make money on it.
Yeah.
Which is legit.
It's completely fair, but to go back and replay the first game, I have to pull out the Xbox, which has been shelved, and get the patch, because was that an Xbox One?
No, that was a 360 game.
Yeah, it was a 360 game.
Something that I thought was curious about these games, this was one of the earlier games to me that did the season pass type thing when it came to DLC. And nobody ever really complained about them doing it. Did it work that effectively?
I think, again, like the Fallout games, they provided a full game originally.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone was completely satisfied with the game they produced.
Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't like the DLC came out 2 months after release. DLC came out, about 6 months after the game. So it was enough time for you to play through the game, and it's not an MMO, it's not something you really play online against a bunch of people, so you don't spend 40 hours a week for weeks on end. It's not Destiny, it's not Call of Duty. So you've put the game to the side, and then when the DLC comes out, you go, oh right, that game. I had a lot of fun. I can go back, enjoy the story that I had already played, and then have new, almost complete mini-stories that was, hey, we liked this character, we're going to develop this side person a little bit more.
And there were many parts in those DLCs, weren't there? I remember them talking about Borderlands 2 DLC a long time after it came out.
They were pretty significant chunks, plus particularly for 2, that's the one where they did the hunting one, right? So when you first go into those, they're really high-level things. Like, you gotta grind quite a bit in the main game before you can actually approach the challenges in some of the DLCs. And so it prolonged that. You couldn't just eat it up like candy because you had to kind of get in and prepare to be able to actually stand up against a lot of the villains in that. They made them just overpowered.
Yeah.
On first approach. So you kind of go in and you're like, oh shit, I can't do this. So then you kind of go out and you grind for a bit, and then you go back in and it's like, oh, okay, I know what to expect. Freaking witch doctors were awful.
Now, you had mentioned it added 2 characters with each DLC?
Yeah.
In general, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what motivated you to replay the game a bajillion times?
A little bit, because you want to go in and see what the new characters are like, because they did different stuff.
Except you always play the same character.
I am partial to female characters in games because I just like them, yeah.
Yeah. For her, it seems to be more the character tree.
Mm-hmm.
And giving your character a different build out as you go through. For me, I tend to grab a different character when we go through. And it's interesting just because they always have a different play style, different power-ups, different...
Well, and that speaks to us playing it as a group, because even if I didn't play the new character, I was still playing with the new character. That was still someone that was on my team. And so I had to adjust my play style depending on what he was able to do with his and how we could balance that to go through the game.
Sounds legit.
Yeah.
So everybody always talks about how good the writing is for these games. The only experience I have with the writing was in the Telltale Games adventure game, Tales from the Borderlands. Is that taken from the main games? Is that...
It is not. At least story-wise. Some of the comedy, some of the feel is still there. But I think a lot of the love for the stories came from the characters they made. And so just how well certain characters embodied certain traits.
Yeah, like the bravery of the soldier, like that kind of thing?
No, I was talking about, so there's a side character called Mr. Torque.
Oh, Torque, yeah.
Yeah, and so he's just this big bodybuilder, stupid guy who loves explosions.
Mm-hmm.
Just yell about explosions all the time.
And that's all he did, is he'd show up and yell about explosions and encourage you to blow things up and then do a little air guitar solo.
Right.
And then there's Tiny Tina, who's just this hoodlum who...
Hug a butt.
She's
Yeah, hug a butt.
like a 12-year-old who loves explosions too, but is like a demolitions expert. And
Doesn't
so
she have a really dark backstory?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
yeah.
gets real dark, and then she's like, oh, hey, look, a unicorn that poops candy.
So there's this one DLC that's them doing like a Dungeons and Dragons style story, and so she's the dungeon master, and so she makes up this whole D&D story, and you go through as the characters playing the thing, and it involves a unicorn made of diamonds that poos good loot.
The good loot poo,
yeah,
huh?
So you feed it iridium, which is this thing in the game, and it poops out these high level guns and stuff that are big guns, and I don't know, it's just funny.
Gearbox made Borderlands, yeah?
Yeah.
They alluded in their most recent game, Battleborn, that they're working on Borderlands 3.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have things you would expect or hope out of that?
I don't know. It's interesting, because after the first game, I really wasn't expecting much out of 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then they created basically a new company, a new bad guy, that seemed to come out of nowhere, and you play through that story, and then prequel came out, and it was where that bad guy came from. And so it makes a lot more sense.
Well, so the vault structure of the games makes it really easy for them to add new chapters without redoing anything or trying to tie into the original story, because you're about a bunch of treasure hunters that are looking for vaults in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to find this treasure, which I think is another reason why people like the story and the writing, because then you have this narration from this other character who kind of tells it like a story to a kid, but he's kind of rude about it, and it's just cheeky and funny. And
Got it.
yeah, and so there's just all of the kind of nuances of a good story that you want without any of the weightiness of a drama, because you're playing a game. You're not going to pay a ton of attention to it. But for me, I think I didn't really expect a lot from the first games, just because they were kind of a cool package on their own, and so I'm pretty easygoing with what I expect. If you can keep up with as good as it was, I'm not looking for a lot. It would be interesting if they were able to add a modification of the weapons somehow, because right now you find loot and it's generated however it is, and there's no real rhyme or reason to how it is, but there are different things that you can do in modifications in other aspects of the game that it would be interesting to add that to the weaponry, but it's already such an extensive loot system that I just don't think that that's something that they could do with it, because it would just be huge.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be curious, because I know they haven't really made a current Gen 1. Borderlands 1 and 2 were on 360, weren't they?
Yeah. And
the
PS3.
pre-sequel. Yeah. Maybe they would have the ability on the new one. I have no idea.
Well, I just mean that it would be overly complicating to the game to have that, because you're already finding so much loot, and there's only so much you can keep in your backpack, and you end up finding stuff that you really like, but then 2 minutes later you find something else you want to try out, and you lose track of the things. And they have this like favoriting, trashing structure where you can mark things to keep it or not. But even then, there's the sheer volume of things that you come across. I think it would overly complicate the mechanic of the game.
Got it.
To try and add that mod structure to the weapons or shields or different things.
Well, we are likely to hear about it pretty soon, since they're already talking about it, and they're going to come out and go, all that stuff she said, not happening.
That's fine. I'm not a game designer.
There you go. Something you did say, though, was expectations, which I think rolls decently into the next thing, which we were going to talk about the Fable series. And basically our disappointments with the expectations. Now, I have played 1, 2, and 3. Aaron has also played 1, 2, and 3.
Correct.
Rachel has played 1, maybe 2, and definitely 3.
I played 1 extensively. I'm not sure how much I got into 2, but then played some of 3, but really my interest was in the first one, and it just completely fizzled.
So why did you have interest in the first one?
It was interesting. That was like the first console game that I'd ever played.
Okay.
And that was, again, through a boyfriend who had the Xbox. And so that was a game that I got interested in. That was one that that was the first one I was actually interested in.
Mm-hmm.
He ruined me for video games when we tried to play Halo, and he killed me every time I spawned. That was horrible. So then finding Fable, and it was something that was more interesting, didn't have just the stupid weapon stuff with it. So it just was interesting. And then to get into it and be able to choose your path and do good things or bad things, and how that spun the evolution of the game was really cool, and I found that to be very intriguing. I really liked being a bad guy.
So what lost your interest in the second one then?
I'm not sure. I think it's because the newness of that wore off by the time the second one came. Like, it wasn't enough to keep me interested, and they didn't come up with a novel way to use that or something that kind of reignited that interest in the game, because it was a pretty simple mechanic, right, for that to be the thing. And they didn't really step it up with the next ones. It was kind of just the same thing with a different setting.
They never really stepped it up, period, but that's kind of what we're talking
Yeah,
about
like,
here.
but that's what I mean. Like, I think that's why I just didn't... It's like, okay, I kind of did that the first time.
I still remember hearing about the first one where they did the beta testing, and there was the mechanic where you could lead the children out of the town and then sacrifice them.
Yeah.
Pied Piper thing.
And they took that out of the game, and I heard that and I instantly went, oh, awesome. You have that much control. You can be, you can make whatever character you want. You can be that evil, you can be that good, and it'll change how the game plays. And you get in, and it doesn't really affect much.
Yeah.
And we will get into that extensively with the final topic.
Yeah, we'll cover that later.
I think maybe that was it too, because by the time I got to the end of Fable 1, it was like, oh, well, all those choices I made, they didn't really build up to this huge thing that was that different, depending on which way I took it.
You could have beaten on children the entire game, but if you chose not to murder your sister at the end, nobody cared.
Yeah, and so it was just a weird anticlimactic kind of end to.
And the control you were talking about, I was wondering if that would become central to disappointment for you.
Well, I expected so much out of Fable 1 and was very let down. Fable 2, they were like, hey, you know everything we let you down with in Fable 1? We're going to actually give it to you for Fable 2. And I was like, yeah, maybe. No.
Do you remember how I beat Fable 2?
No.
So that's when we were still up at ISU.
Oh, right.
In Fable 2, if a second player was logged in, they got the achievements. So I went down to visit my girlfriend for the weekend. I go, what'd you do all weekend? Beat Fable 2? Huh? He goes, oh, you beat it too, by the way. I ended up not playing through it for another year because I already had everything done. I don't need to do this.
So Fable 2 basically ruined any expectation I had for Fable 3.
Which is amazing that Fable 3 managed to let you down even more.
Well, I think I was happiest with Fable 3.
Really?
Because I didn't expect anything from it. It wasn't a bad game. It was just...
It's a property management sim.
Yeah, it wasn't great. Well, I'm a nerd and like RTSs and
Oh, that's the one where you could like buy taverns and stuff.
Correct.
Oh man, yeah. That game did not catch my attention. And obviously, I, clearly remember so much about that game as we're talking about this.
Yeah, as you played a distinct entry. Like, oh yeah, I did do that. Yeah, that game was nothing but disappointment for me. And that was basically the end of a conga line of disappointment. So, you actually enjoyed it though, Aaron. Enjoy is a strong word.
Yeah, enjoy is a strong word. I didn't hate it. It didn't let me down.
Because you had nowhere to be led.
Because I expected nothing from it.
Peter Molyneux overpromised. I said this on some earlier podcast. He said, if you cut down a tree the next year, it'll have grown up slightly and everybody... No, you're lying to me. These are lies, but I was young and I didn't understand that his honeyed words were non-truths. So then when the second one came out and they're like, hey, we've improved it. Have you really though? And everything was goofier. Do you remember the final boss? You didn't have to shoot him. You didn't have to kill the final boss.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I think I just watched you play this one.
Probably.
And they made fun of it in the third game. They even said, what kind of final boss dies in one shot? This is ridiculous. Then in the third one, I got taken in again because they said, yeah, when you become a king, you make promises to people. And your promises, you either make good on or renege on. and that'll affect your coffers, and your coffers will affect the end of the game. But what it ended up turning the game into was grind for money. You're the king of an entire country, and you're cutting logs so that way you don't turn somebody's home into a strip mine. This is really what the game became? This is ridiculous.
And I understand where that move was going, because to only grade on karma,
Right.
to have that plus minus be your only indication of how good a player is, means that final choice changes everything. And it's not like they gave you, oh, you've been good all this time, here are 2 relatively good choices you can pick from, or you've been Satan this whole time, here's the lesser
Satan
of 2
and
evils.
Satan light.
Yeah. It's
My
the same-
main goal was to grow horns. Whole first game.
But it gave you weird bald spots. Do you remember that?
You get followed around by flies. Like,
Yeah.
that's not.
This isn't right at all. And then in the second game, you could do, I don't remember, one was pure and one was corrupt, I think, and then
Yeah.
there was still good and evil. So you could be pure evil, where you did pure actions. It was weird nonsense that dictated, like, if you go kill a bunch of homeless people, but then you donate a bunch of money, you become, like, pure evil. So you look like you're anorexic.
Yeah.
It was weird, and it wasn't enjoyable, but that was my experience. Aaron, do you have any more on that?
Oh, I was just gonna pull it back to Fallout, just because with Fallout 3 you had the same karma-like system, and you had certain choices that just completely set it. So you could, give all the water to homeless people you wanted, but if you blew up the town, you went from angelic, great guy to the worst of the worst.
And we're going to take this as an opportunity to move on to our final topic, because I want to open our final topic being the usefulness of meaningful choice in video games. And I want to open with an anecdote from Fallout 3 that you may remember. Have you heard this one, Rachel?
Probably.
Probably. So I got Fallout 3 and I went into town, like, all right, I need to go find my dad. And I go into town, and this guy goes, hey, I'll give you a bunch of money if you blow up town. Why would I ever blow up town? I'm a good guy. Okay, well, go talk to this guy. He'll be able to tell you where your dad is. All right, da-da-da-da-da. Oh, I'll try and fast talk him. Nope, you're a sucker. Man, screw this town. And I went, da-da-da. 20 minutes later, and I went, click, boom. Oh, I may have made a mistake.
As the large mushroom cloud rises in the distance.
I destroyed the starting town within half an hour of starting the game up. And it was interesting because not a lot of games had done things like we'd mentioned before, Fable. It really didn't affect anything at all. In this game, doing a bad thing actually affected the progression of what you could and couldn't do because you murdered a bunch of NPCs.
But there were very specific choices.
Right.
So having the overall karma of the game versus those choices of, to spoiler alert, sacrifice yourself at the end of the game versus sacrifice your companion.
Well, they undid that.
Yeah, for the DLC, but that affected the ending you got.
Mm-hmm.
Same with blowing up the town or not.
And there were some mods done to Fallout 3 that reduced how dramatic those changes were. Because, like you said, if you blew up the town, you rocketed all the way to the bottom of the karmometer.
Yeah.
And that just really wasn't the nuance people were expecting out of a Fallout game. Fallout is an interesting one because 3 in particular was real black and white about the morality. Kind of to its fault. Because these are the good guys. If you don't side with the good guys, you're a bad guy and you're a dick. So you're obviously terrible. Anyways, Rachel, do you have something to add over there?
I just watched the Fallout games. While I have watched it and kind of seen the progression of things, I don't have an emotional investment because I wasn't playing. It was more like watching a movie.
I haven't played the 4th one, so I'm not going to be talking about it at all. A game that you have played, though, Rachel, that had choice extensively was Until Dawn. In fact, you were the first person I knew who played this game, which really surprised me because Aaron goes, yeah, Rachel picked up Until Dawn. What? Why? Why would she do that?
Well, because I've always liked the horror genre, and so the idea of it being a scary video game was just interesting. And actually it was because Philip DeFranco is a YouTuber who I like, and he talked about playing it, and I think he had some people in his staff playing it, and it just looked really interesting because it was very jumpy. And of course, unlike a movie where you kind of get engrossed, you're making decisions that change how certain things happen. And so the whole concept with that one is the choice comes down to this butterfly effect thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so not only did it affect things, it actually tracked what changes you decided to do. And it flipped little butterfly effect things that would show you the choices you
Mm-hmm.
made. And then as you go through the game and as that ripple effect happens, it adds pages to that specific icon. So you can kind of flip through and see how that affected things in the end, including getting characters killed early on and stuff like that.
Aaron, did you actually play through Until Dawn?
I did.
I hadn't heard that. What did you think? Because I am going to just bash on this game.
No, that's totally fair. I played it once and I liked it, but then couldn't really bring myself to play through it again because after watching it the first time, you can see what are the set points that no matter what you do, don't change. And that was kind of disingenuous to the idea, I thought.
So what I thought was interesting was you could tell what was the right choice and what was the wrong choice, or what was going to get someone killed.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't necessarily what was the altruistic choice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, oh, I'm making this person sacrifice themselves for the group so magically everybody lives. It's you were told the personality aspects of each character as they were introduced. And you saw how your small choices affected their character.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could monitor this. And so when it came down to the story-defining choices, if you did not act how those characters should act based on what their original personalities are, then bad things happened, which I thought was kind of interesting. Because you would have, if someone acted selflessly or tried to save the girl as opposed to jumping to safety first, then
There's that one specific
I remember that
instance
one.
of that.
Yeah.
That pissed me off so bad.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
just bailed.
Well,
She deserved it.
But
And
then
that-
that was the right thing to do.
It was the right
and
thing
I
to
tried
do.
to save her, and it was just like,
Thump, 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 thump.
which I think was an interesting aspect because it
And so
definitely.
that I give them credit for.
Yeah.
That is the only... Okay, that is a good one, but I can't think of many other examples like that. Personally, if you can...
No, not necessarily. Pretty much everything was almost by the book. But the thing was that those characters in particular had the personality that was kind of acting outside of that. And so there were interesting ways to bring in just the individuality of the characters themselves and the people you were playing at that point and how they would have acted and what would have been the best way to move forward in that instance.
It's a horror game. And so you watch a horror movie and you yell at the screen, no, don't open that door, you idiot. And this was a game that forced you to open the door.
Yeah.
Oh, and that was, to me, poorly utilized in at least one part. When you're running as mostly naked Hayden Panettiere, you have to choose left or right, left or right, left or right. There is no indication of which way you're supposed to go at any point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a disingenuous choice there because eventually you're going to get caught in some capacity. So that whole sequence, it feels pointless to me. And something you'd mentioned earlier, Rachel, was the butterfly effect. I felt like that was dramatically underutilized.
Yeah.
Because it was basically, does this person die now or will they possibly make it to the end?
Yeah.
And something that made me so mad, I'm curious if either of you had this happen. We worked so hard to get everybody to the end of the game. It failed because at one point near the beginning, Kara slipped up while trying to save the blonde slutty chick. She slipped up twice, and that gets her brutally murdered. And then I messed up because I could never hold the controller
Still enough? Yeah.
So I got the kid with the Letterman jacket. I got his face beaten in at one point.
Oh, I got him. He got hooked, I think, on mine.
But we got to the end with most everybody alive. The one place the butterfly effect was really effective was whether or not you pulled the trigger on the girl with the sock cap.
Yeah.
That was an effective use of the butterfly effect.
I think the idea for the game was there.
Yeah, I think
It was just poorly... Again,
it was a small game. They didn't do it in a large, extensive format, and so at least that's what strikes me. If they were to take it to Fallout levels of detail, they might be able to do it bigger. But it was kind of a boxed, this is the storyline, this is the horrific thing that happens, these are the characters, you gotta get through it. So it depends on what you expect from the game. I wanted to see it because, like a movie I would watch, I wanted to see what the plotline was, what they wanted to do with it. So then once I saw that, pretty hard time going back and replaying it to try and get different scenarios because I could see the overarching story, and at that point that was decided.
And I think that's where the problem came in was what happened at the end. We got almost everybody to the end, and we didn't realize people were supposed to be leaving the house. So we're running around and dodging around, and I'm like, quick, kill him. And she goes to flip the switch, and almost everybody was still in the house. So suddenly you see thump, thump, thump.
Oh, no.
Everybody died except one person.
Yeah.
And that's what really jumped out at me. Whether or not 6 people made it to the house or one person, the game would have ended with the house on fire, which is what I really disliked about it, was it always ended with the house on fire.
But I think, again, that goes back to the way that they had to write a plot line for this game that was very much in a cinematic style, and so then they stapled it at certain points to meet that plot line. And they could have done it bigger, and maybe that studio will do another game that's a bit more extensive, that has a little bit more of that. But I do think that they had the right mechanics for most of it. It was just the story just wasn't quite flexible enough to hold it.
I think you just needed multiple endings.
Yeah.
Either multiple people burning down the house, or one way that the house doesn't burn down, or...
Where in Heavy Rain, your characters could get killed successively as the game went on, so their story would end there. That's what jumped out at me about Until Dawn, was the story ended for them at the same place regardless. So if Sean or whoever, if he made it to the end of the game, his plot stopped being relevant where he died, regardless of where he died. Whereas in Heavy Rain, the story kept progressing because you were still trying to save this child at the end. So one person could get to the end and still win. 4 people could get to the end and still fail. So that was interesting because the choice actually felt like it did something in that game. And it wasn't just, are you evil or are you good? These silly binary decisions you see in Infamous, Fable, anything like that, where they say, press X for good, press circle for bad. This, you actually had to do stuff, like weird trials, like cutting off your finger.
And you actually had the opportunity to miss stuff.
You did. You had an opportunity to screw it up.
Yeah, you'd have to explore a house, and if you didn't find the thing hidden behind the door because you didn't think to shut the door when you walked in, you missed the clue. That one mistake wouldn't doom you, but it would make it a little bit harder later on.
Rachel, when I mentioned something about Infamous, you look like you...
I was just going to say that I really enjoyed that game, but I don't remember a lot about the mechanics of it. It was kind of like when you read a good book, but it's candy. It's not like something that stuck with me.
The problem with the good-evil mechanic in Infamous is it went back to that silly binary good-bad. And the first 2 games had that in spades. You could beat up homeless people in the first one or heal them. That's what determined if it was good or bad. Like if somebody was on the ground, you could either drain their life or restrain them.
That's right, yeah.
And then at the end of the game, it doesn't matter if you've chosen good or bad. The whole game, it says, do you want to detonate this bomb that'll kill 40,000 people, or do you want to disarm it? Doesn't matter what you've done before this point. Then why have I done anything before this point?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets frustrating, because why are they even bothering with the choice? You guys actually have a PS4 now, so I would recommend you play Infamous Second Son, because it takes a much better approach to the good-evil, because in the first game, it's detonate the bomb and kill 40,000 people, or don't detonate the bomb. The second one was whether or not you were going to commit genocide against your people, the mutants, or everyone else. Like, there's no half measures in this game. So for the final game, which there's a distinct chance you'll play, so I won't ruin anything on it, it's actually a choice that makes sense. And it's not a good or bad decision, it's whether or not your character feels it's right or wrong. And it doesn't affect the plot overall, it just affects how people interact with you, which is what a good moral decision should do. Where it falls apart, for another example, is BioShock. When you are killing or saving these little girls, it doesn't affect how the other ones interact with you.
No. Killing one for the quick power-up doesn't make it harder to find the next one.
Right.
That'd be interesting.
That would have been amazing, is if you would have killed one of these little sisters and then the rest are scared of you to the point where the guardians, the big daddies, would actively attack you had you been murdering all these little sisters. That would have made sense. Instead, it's the exact same encounter. The only thing it changed was the ending. The only thing. They improved that a bit in the second game, where you had 3 significant moral choices, some of which it was really difficult to tell what was right or wrong. There was a big mutated monster dude that they were using for like a power source or something. And you would think the good decision would be to murder him, but apparently not. And the decisions you made in that influenced what your protege did at the very end of the game, which was an interesting way to approach it. The ending was the same, but what your adoptive daughter chose to do changed based on that. So that was an interesting way to approach it.
Yeah, it's a matter of you don't necessarily have to have a different ending, but if the path there takes a different route because of your choices, it seems worth it to me.
I actually really like this idea that it affects how people interact with you after the big climax, because some of these games you kind of just keep going right after that, and you continue to go back and get achievements, or you run around, or whatever. Especially like in Borderlands, you level out the max and keep looting and all of that kind of thing. So in order to be able to separate the climax from the moral decisions you've been making throughout and make it about the repercussions of post end of game blowout, how that interferes with the gameplay at that point would be a neat way for game designers to be able to decouple it from having to write 4 different endings or, all of that.
In Infamous, it actually did do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you made a good decision or a bad decision, the pedestrians would actually applaud you if you had good karma, or they would try to fight you.
Yeah.
Knowing that you were a super bad guy, they would still run up and try to punch you in the face, which I thought was really interesting. I really wish you guys had played Infamous Second Son, because the big decision at the end there is one of the best ones. Despite the fact it's a good bad, it's still a really well-constructed decision. So I would 100% recommend it. Anyways, this was actually talked about in a Penny Arcade comic once upon a time. The good bad decisions are always send a kitten to college or murder a kitten. It's never small things like going back to Fable. We'll actually run through the Fable real fast. The first one, kill your sister or destroy the God Sword. You just couldn't keep the God Sword. You had to destroy it or your sister. This is ridiculous. In the second game, do you remember the big decision at the end of that one?
You could bring back your dog.
You could bring back your dog. You could bring back your family. You could bring back all the people who died working on the tower, or you could get a bunch of money.
Which one did I choose?
The dog.
The dog. That's what everybody did. They did. They're like, why would I want to bring back a bunch of people I've never met? It's funny because everything else that the Fable game did terribly morality-wise, when they killed that dog...
Okay, but I think that is a whole other topic in itself about animals in games and how easy it is for us to not think about shooting a person, but when the dog dies in Fallout, he restarts the game.
Even with Fallout 4?
Dog can't die in Fallout 4.
Okay. He couldn't die in 3 either, I think.
That was a patch.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm being really serious about
No,
this.
actually, I think that was a perk.
That the dog couldn't die?
Yeah.
In hardcore mode, they could die. They could die all the way.
Yeah.
But you're right. That's a different thing, forming attachment to NPCs.
And it's interesting how that interaction affects how we view the moral choices that we're making in the game, and that you would choose to bring back the dog instead of anything else.
You could choose to bring back the dog, and that's interesting that was one of the moral decisions, but it was also a decoupling of the gameplay and the rest, because any other time your dog died, you threw a dog treat on him and he was all better. And this time, this guy's got a antique pistol, and for some reason it took your dog all the way out.
Came out of kryptonite.
Ridiculous. Awful.
Just one other thing I'd like to point out is the mental state system in GTA Just because it doesn't matter if you're crazy and just go around killing random people. They just go, oh, we're going to put you with all the other crazies.
Unless you play in private games.
Well, yeah.
Then you're stuck with me.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
Rachel, you look like you had something to add about that.
I was just going to say you were going to finish your thought about the third Fable game and how that climax happened.
Oh, right.
And then I got distracted about animals.
That's fine. Since you guys have both played it, though, they tried to do the morality thing at the end better. Was you have to try and keep all your decisions, and you have to have enough money, because for some reason, for every gold you had, you saved another person. You can literally put a value on a human life there.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's awful. It was terrible. Because, like I said, the morality there involved you breaking your back.
Yeah.
There wasn't a good way to do it. What you ended up doing, what I ended up doing was I would buy all the houses, jack all the rent way up, and then rubber band the joystick so I was running in a circle so the game wouldn't go into standby while my money just kept going up. And then when Kara played through it, she went, "Oh, this is awful. How much money does your character have?" And she just took all the money from me. And so that's how she got out of having to do it. Ridiculous. I would say that they actually handled morality terrible in the first one, a little better in the second one by not making it just good and bad, and then back to terrible in the third one.
Yeah.
That's my opinion of it. Did you have anything else about the Fable games or the Fallout games? The Fallout games I feel like you could touch a little bit on.
So
try to avoid 4.
Yeah. Well, in 3 you had good, bad. That was pretty much all you had.
It was.
With New Vegas, they introduced the idea of factions, which was kind of interesting because no one was necessarily a good guy.
Now, even the NCR?
The NCR.
The NCR, even though they were trying to do order, they weren't doing a very good job of it, and they were still kind of corrupt.
Yeah. Well, they had corruption, but they had nice ideas. No slavery, everyone works hard, but yeah, it's a bureaucracy and people are corrupted. You had
Kaiser's Legion,
who were slavers and obviously terrible.
Well, and that's the thing, though, is that even though they did awful things, like they strung people up and tore them out, they still had a lot of order, even though...
If you followed the rules, you were safe.
Right. They were terrible in the fact that if you opposed them, you would be brutally murdered. But if you fell into lockstep, they were really well cared for, all things considered.
And then you had supporting the Las Vegas Strip families, who it was...
Yeah, it was Mr. House, wasn't it?
Yeah. And so you could basically say everyone's on their own. Whoever can grab the most wins.
Now, that was good. With Mr. House?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was where it was almost like a dictatorship, wasn't it?
Kind of.
I never did Mr. House. That was the one I didn't go through.
I think that's what they were going for, and it just didn't really play out.
No, it was too similar to the one where you turned your back on everybody, which was my favorite.
Yeah, or you could be like, nope, everyone loses, everyone's now on their own, go away.
That was the best thing in the world. That was my favorite ending, hands down, because you have to murder Mr. House, murder Kaiser, then you have to do something else that results in that robot guy. What was his name? You remember him, right? He was the one who assisted you. Anyways, he throws the president off the dam at the end.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. So that was my favorite ending. And I really liked how New Vegas approached the morality there.
But you still basically had 2-ish decisions. Because really, you chose NCR or Kaiser or none of the above.
Or you could have chose House. I mean, yeah, you were choosing your ending there, but it still wasn't, these guys are going to kill everybody because they're rapists.
Yeah, but again, at the end, you got to the final battle and you could just be like, I'm actually helping the other guy. And so it didn't really matter how you played through until you got to that almost final choice.
Well, so my only comment on these is just as a spectator. And so watching them, yeah, obviously, like, the Legion was supposed to be bad because they were slavers, but there were still aspects of the society that were maybe more successful for the continuation of society in that way. And so in some aspect, yes, it could be seen as political commentary, and then everybody has their good and bad. But it kind of made it a choice-based system that was decoupled from morality because it was about who you sided with. It wasn't about... well, these are the good guys, because nobody was a good guy. Everybody was screwing it up. Nobody was a bad guy because they had things that they were doing and they were protecting the people they cared about in the way that they could.
And that's why I liked it so much, because it wasn't really what's good and bad, it's what you think is right and wrong.
Right. You think is the more efficient way of running a society or how to move forward.
Right, and that's why I hated the Lonesome Road DLC. Do you remember that at all? Mm-hmm. That's the one where at the very end you have to make a choice what you're going to destroy with this orbital laser. I hated that DLC for a lot of reasons. One, in the game you were never the big hero. You just happened to be an incidental bystander who got involved. In this one it said, you are the most important person in the world. Why would I be the most important person in the world now? I have never been the most important person in the world. Well, how important are we talking here? Destroy somebody. And I didn't realize that if I didn't take the little robot in there with me, I had to pick destroy Kaiser or NCR. So it forced me to choose who was good and bad in a terribly implemented Sophie's Choice type situation.
For New Vegas, I wouldn't describe you as like a bystander. I would describe you as an emissary.
Okay.
And so, or an ambassador, where the main point of a lot of what you do is go talk to different factions within New Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have people who have occupied an Air Force base and have access to planes. You have people who are basically just doctors without borders after the apocalypse. And so it's getting different factions to work together.
Right.
But it tends to fall apart with the limitation of what choices you can make for them or what you can push.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically you could choose whether a faction joins Kaiser or not. You could choose if a different faction joins the NCR or not. You can't necessarily push them towards one side or the other. You can't say, all right, forget the NCR, forget Kaiser, I'm pushing everybody else together against them. And so the limit of choice in what seems like it should be a very open game to have specific targets to push factions to kind of falls apart.
That might have been a technical limitation at that point.
I'm sure it was, because then you have multiple endings to script.
And they already had 4, and I know 4 isn't a big number, but the amount of work that went into each of those 4 was an enormous set.
Well, and just, like the type of game that it is, that's already a huge game with just the wasteland being as open as it is and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then 4, trying to avoid spoilers, just again try to expand on that, where you have multiple factions. No one's necessarily good. They have their reasons for doing what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's who you want to support.
Okay.
And so it's a progression.
All right. Let's go ahead and wrap this up with final thoughts on what we would like out of our good-bad morality systems, because that, I think, encapsulates your general idea. Would you like to reiterate it?
I want the ability for choice other than the binary, to be able to push the characters where I want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's just a game built around choice, then I want to choose my ending.
Okay. Rachel.
So I think because we're talking about moral decisions, I think what I'd be interested in seeing, and maybe this is in the Until Dawn series or just in general, because as I've already said, some of my favorite game, Borderlands, is not a moral decision kind of game. Right? There's no moral judgments about shooting bandits in the face. The idea that since these are moral decisions, that it would be more indicative of relationships with the NPCs and how that affects the relationships that you need to build with people to move through the game. And so even if it doesn't necessarily affect the overall plot points and like the big staple effects or like the staple events that happen, if it changes how the character themselves experiences the universe that they're living in, then I think that might be an interesting way to pull it in. That would, yes, add a whole bunch of development and time and consideration for those plot points, but not necessarily change the major overarching goal of the story of a game. But yeah, I think that's my thought.
All right. Mine can best be summed up as, I really don't care whether or not you still have a binary choice. I want it to change from good and bad to what you think is right and wrong. That's what I really want to change. Is I don't care if you only have the decision whether or not you're going to burn a house down or save everybody inside. I want to actually have these decisions be representative of what my character wants to do, which is right or wrong. So if I had the ability to burn down a house at that point, is it because I want to burn down the house because I hate everybody in the house, or
everybody in the house is evil?
Right,
or...
like I don't care whether or not it's supposed to be interpreted good or bad. Not that this necessarily ties into what we were going for here, but I don't really care if the decision affects the game whatsoever. I want to make decisions that reflect the idea that I'm trying to get across. Because the storyline might stay the same. If the house happens to be incidental on the way to the goal, I'd still want to burn the house down. Probably. Maybe not.
Maybe not.
But that's really what I want to see. Is I'm really tired of them saying, this is blue good, this is red bad.
Yeah, I
Just
agree.
want 2 decisions. That's what really gets me. But anyways, I think we're about out of time for today.
Yep.
So, Aaron, thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
Rachel, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
And don't forget to get online and add your opinions, and we will see you next time on Co-Opinions.